And thank you very much for joining us. We're really excited to do this presentation for you. Let me tell you first a little bit about our format. We have titled this a debate. And I am here to tell you that Don and Rob know a whole lot about this subject, and they have a whole lot of passion around the subject, which makes having set up this presentation really fun and exciting and illuminating. What I will be interjecting this entire time is that an enormous part of the ability to have a judge see things the way that is best for a client is to have fantastic storytelling abilities. And as the expert, you are given a big burden of trying to communicate to a judge. And if you've ever tried to do that, what you know is that judges, lawyers, we are not numbers people. We don't have numbers brains. We went into law, we will all tell you, because we were no good at math. We like stories, and we like pictures. And so one of the ways that experts can really communicate to judges and the attorneys that they're working with is to be able to really be able to communicate actual effects of what analyses will yield for a family.
Aspect of what is an asset from an economic perspective, and at least according to businessdictionary.com, it's something valuable that an entity owns or benefits from or has use of in generating income. So a business asset, at least as this particular source defines it, it has to contribute to the generation of income to even be considered an asset to be valued in the first place.
This definition of an asset isn't very complex or really very interesting. And then for attorneys, I will tell you, we'll just start with Black's Law definition of property because it's really long. It's ridiculously long, isn't it? If we look at the difference between just looking from the CPA perspective to then looking at the attorney perspective, you can see one of the reasons why we don't always speak the same language. Not only this, but in fact for many states, including Colorado, when you look at the domestic relations statutes, there is no definition of property at all. So then you go from no legislative determination of what property is for domestic relations litigation, and then the typical lawyer will start with Black's Law definition of property and get just about nowhere with that. So then you go into the case law, and the case law says, well, there isn't a statutory definition of property, so we sort of have to make it up as we go along. And as the courts go along, they change their definition of marital property. And the definition of marital property is different amongst the states. So for instance, it used to be that pensions were not deemed property because they were too speculative. You didn't know if you would live to the time that you got this pension. You couldn't sell it. You couldn't get a loan off of it. You couldn't bequeath it. It wasn't property. And then, lo and behold, a little bit later, for all states, pensions started to become divisible property. And then in some states, certain beneficial interests in trusts are not property, and in some states, beneficial interests in trusts are property. And in some states, there was a question of whether a professional license was or was not property. Our state had to determine it by judges because the legislature didn't do it, and we decided it wasn't. In New York, however, it was property for many, many, many years, and now it cannot be divided as property. Stock options have had a little bit of the same issues, but for the attorneys in the domestic relations arena, we don't necessarily even know what property is. So the downside is you kind of have to scratch your head, and the upside is you get to use that fact to your advantage sometimes.